Well, hello, and welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And I'm Sarah Jane.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 5 of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, the Storm, and What Came of It.
Good to have you back, Sarah Jane.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you're
First
first returning champion to the show.
Yeah.
It feels so right.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you back. You were on in season 1, correct?
Episode 10.
Episode 10, Father Christmas. We gave you you have the plaque hanging up in your house still.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
yep,
I thought
it's
so.
very prominent.
Our first guest and our first returning guest as well, too. Well, we have quite a few things to get into before we even start the episode. The first thing I wanted to mention is that we got an email from Richard who kindly let us know that we had been pronouncing the word forecastle incorrectly. That's the word that looks like forecastle, and it's pronounced forecastle.
Who knew?
So yeah, I wanted to make that correction, and I appreciate Richard's generosity in pointing that out in a very kind way.
Yeah.
Also, this whole "We Are the King" / "I Am the King" debate.
I had "We Are the King" in my book.
Okay, I was
going to
ask you.
that, yeah.
So you had wait, say that one more time.
I had "We Are the King."
"We Are the King." I put out some feelers on social media, and we had listeners on both sides. Some people have "I Am the King." Some people had "We Are the King." With listeners on Facebook and on Twitter, let us know. So I don't know where this comes from. Any thoughts?
Well, I have an idea of how it may have happened.
Okay.
So I have been reading The Lord of the Rings. I forget by who, but I'm kidding. I've been reading The Lord of the...
Sarah and I just rolled our eyes.
That was totally worth it for the looks I just got. So I've been reading The Lord of the Rings, and I read that there's so many forwards and introductions to that book that it takes about 40 pages before you're actually reading The Lord of the Rings. And one of them, they talked about how they've never been able to print it correctly because every time they print it, they print new mistakes after fixing the old mistakes. And to be fair, that book is significantly longer. But I feel like when you're dealing with books from the 40s and 50s, just the printing process was different, and it was hard to do everything by hand. And I think things have gotten a lot better, but I'm wondering if there's some leftover inconsistencies between printings.
Yeah, maybe.
Depending on whether they came out.
Phil was, I'll tell this quick story. we were leaving the C.S. Lewis Symposium. Phil was feeling guilty because he has not read The Lord of the Rings before, and he was
As he should.
Absolutely. He should feel pretty ashamed of this. You're almost
Don't
30 and
believe
you haven't read
a
it.
word they say.
And I was driving home, and Phil was in the passenger seat using my Kindle because I have The Lord of the Rings on it. He's reading it, and every once in a while he'd be like, "Oh, no, it still isn't started. This is just the next forward," because there are a lot of forwards to the book. I was going to ask you, Sarah Jane, real quick, do you read forewords to books?
It really depends on the book.
I would agree. I have to know the person who's writing the foreword.
Right.
Personally.
Yeah, for the most part.
I have to be friends with them.
For the most part, I'm not reading a foreword.
No way.
No.
I don't think most people do. I don't know. So listeners, let us know if you read the foreword or not.
I feel like it came in handy just now.
That is true.
Within
So I guess
2 weeks.
it was worth it.
Okay. I feel like I made my point.
The last thing I just wanted to mention is as I was editing chapter 4, I spoke very harshly about The Great Gatsby. I was editing it. I thought I'd go pick up my copy I have on the bookshelf. I'm rereading it, and I'm really liking it.
Yeah, you are. Another strong statement for the win.
Yes. So I think I literally said it's a terrible book or something along those lines, and I was an idiot when I made that decision in high school, and when I said that thing 3 weeks ago. So we have talked enough
based on
here.
when you read it in high school.
Exactly, but still,
I feel like we should all reread the things we read in high school before we pass judgment.
Really should,
Not
yeah.
Portrait of an Artist.
Okay,
No
that'll
way.
be your first assignment.
So why don't we go ahead and get started here? We left the crew of the Dawn Treader in the last episode. Caspian had carried out his plan. He had saved the captives. The crew of the Dawn Treader had loaded up and had left the Lone Islands, and then that is where we pick up. And so we decided a fun thing we'll do is when we have our returning guest, your job today, if you choose to accept it, this is your mission, Sarah, is to read for us the chapter summary. Do you have one prepared?
Is this message going to self-destruct?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, I do have one.
Take it away.
All right. The crew sets sail from Narrow Haven and has several good days of good wind that allow Lucy and Reepicheep to play chess in their spare time. Good weather gives way to a great storm lasting 13, some would say 12, days. The Dawn Treader is left battered and without a proper mast to float for a run of still days. Eustace's attempt to steal more than his share of the rationed water is thwarted by Reepicheep standing guard in the night. Finally, the crew drops anchor at a new island and goes ashore in the morning to fill their casks, hunt, and begin ship repairs. Eustace decides he isn't needed to help with any of the tasks at hand and wanders off into the woods. Eventually, fearing that the others have left him, Eustace, after several attempts to orient himself and unable to see the bay, is utterly lost.
That was wonderful. Are you busy
Well
for the
done.
next couple of years to do chapter summaries?
I mean, I love a good summary.
That was great. It was under 150 words.
148.
Wow.
Perfect.
It just always works out so well like that.
It does.
Well, what are some? Well, we'll start with you, Sarah Jane. What's your big takeaway from this chapter?
Yeah, I think that, so having read the book before, it is really setting up what is coming in the next couple of chapters, which I think is really, really important. And I love that we are left with Eustace. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Phil?
There was a great storm, and that was fun to read about, especially how the ship almost seemed to sense that the storm was coming and all the preparations that were made for that storm and then all the action that happened. And then we have this little bit of a respite. But getting to read more of Eustace's journal entries and then the change that we, I think, are about to see, but it's almost anticipated a little bit by the way he starts to feel lonely. All this stuff really sets up, it sets us up well for the next few chapters, I think.
So I was making some connections to chapter 3, where Caspian and crew go across Felamath, and then some of them get captured by the slaves, which was very much, we decided we liked the chapter a lot, but it was a really big setup for really chapter 4. In a similar way, chapter 5 is setting up this latter half of it with Eustace on this island is setting up something, but I am in no way just waiting for I am waiting for the next chapter, but I'm more than content with just what Lewis has for us in this chapter. I think it's a great, great setup chapter. And even it's a great kind of reprieve between adventures. So we have the adventures of the Lone Islands have ended. We have this storm and these wonderful days together. And then we are beginning a new adventure, which is going to carry on for a couple more chapters here on this new island.
It's not without action, and it also has some good little character moments, especially with Reepicheep.
Yeah, one thing that I was thinking is I am wherever Lewis is. I think sometimes you can read a book or watch a movie and you are like, wait, but what's happening with the other characters? Like, I realized by the end of this chapter we were with Eustace alone, and I was like, I don't even care what's happening with everyone else. I'm just like fully present with Eustace. And I think earlier I was like fully present on the ship with whatever was happening. And I think that's part of Lewis's magic of just writing this really captivating story.
Yeah, one of the things that really stuck out to me here at the beginning, because I guess we could start going through it now, is this idea of these delightful days that the crew has together. And we get Lucy's point of view, which we really haven't gotten a ton of either Pevensey. And I don't think we've had anything really from Edmund's point of view this book so far.
No.
He's here, but we've gotten nothing from his point of view, a little from Lucy, and obviously a little bit from Caspian. Mostly it's been Eustace, obviously. And I love just being back with Lucy. I love this kind of moment of solitude we get with her as she is being on the ship and just delighting in, playing chess and these other things. I picked up a book by C.S. Lewis scholar Devin Brown. It is called Inside the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. It was written, I think, to coincide with the movie that came out about a decade ago. And I was reading it, and it does a great job, talking through a lot of the details inside the book. And I wanted to read a connection that Brown made, which I really enjoyed. He talks about this season, these short few days where things are just delightful and before the storm comes. And he notes that we're not to despise, but to cherish the everyday. Lewis usually focuses on conflict, but the ordinary things sometimes slip in. I was thinking about this and was wondering if y'all can remember any other times where we have ordinary things happening in Narnia outside of the conflict that usually brings our characters into Narnia.
I'm trying to picture, are there any scenes of them doing laundry or washing anything? At the end of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, they're hunting, and that is semi-normal, but not really normal. Not normal like we would know.
I feel like the entire scene in the Beaver's house.
Oh,
and
that's
Mrs.
great,
Beaver is, making food and packing up and just being really normal. And I know that was a contentious moment. But I
No,
just think
that's-
that's super normal.
No, that's really great because one of the phrases, and I don't know if Brown coined this or not, but that showed up a couple of times, is this idea of a sacramental ordinary. Something that is routine or ordinary, but something about it is sacred. I hadn't made this connection. That's so great, Sarah Jane, because in chapter 8 of Wardrobe that you're talking about, they're just eating dinner. That's something all of us do, have dinner around a table. And yet what's happening here is incredible. Aslan is being revealed for the first time. They've heard his name, but they're getting the prophecy and all those things. And it's this beautiful, sacred thing happening around something that's pretty ordinary, dinner around a table. One of our listeners had actually pointed out some connections between Narnia and the liturgical calendars, or the liturgical calendar, I should say. And I would argue myself that there is some kind of connection between ordinary time in the liturgical calendar and what's happening here. The liturgical calendar, it obviously comes after Pentecost. It's the longest time in the liturgical calendar. It's when one church one time said it's a time when, I like this, a time where we explore what it means to live daily in faith, a time of growth as we explore everyday sacredness. And I wonder if this ordinary time is what is preparing Lucy and Eustace and all of them for what's to come next. Because really, their adventures, it said last chapter, this is when the adventures are really just beginning. And just like we have ordinary time that then leads us into Advent and then through the rest of Christ's life in the liturgical calendar, this is a similar thing where this ordinary time that Lucy has on the ship is now preparing all of them for what comes next.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can't remember the exact words. I could look it up, but there's something that Lewis writes in this chapter of something about the island and what's happening there is going to concern Eustace more than anyone else.
Yeah.
And he gives us that little piece of what's coming.
Well, I have a selection from the book here that I'm going to read concerning the storm that comes up. There came an evening when Lucy, gazing idly astern at the long furrow or wake they were leaving behind them, saw a great rack of clouds building itself up in the west with amazing speed. Then a gap was torn in it, and a yellow sunset poured through the gap. All the waves behind them seemed to take on unusual shapes, and the sea was a drab or yellowish color like dirty canvas. The air grew cold. The ship seemed to move uneasily as if she felt danger behind her. The sail would be flat and limp one minute and wildly full the next. While she was noting these things and wondering at a sinister change which had come over the very noise of the wind, Drinian cried, "All hands on deck!" In a moment, everyone became frantically busy. The hatches were battened down, the galley fire was put out, men went aloft to reef the sail. Before they had finished, the storm struck them. It seemed to Lucy that a great valley in the sea opened just before their bows, and they rushed down into it, deeper down than she would have believed possible. A great gray hill of water, far higher than the mast, rushed to meet them. It looked certain death, but they were tossed to the top of it. Then the ship seemed to spin around. A cataract of water poured over the deck. The poop and the forecastle were like two islands with a fierce sea between them. Up aloft, the sailors were lying out along the yard, desperately trying to get control of the sail. A broken rope stood out sideways in the wind, as straight and stiff as if it were a poker. And then Lewis goes on to tell us that they're supposed to Lucy needs to go get below deck.
That is such a well-written scene.
Mm-hmm.
Even just hearing you read it again, I still was caught up in the storytelling of it all.
It really builds the intensity for the storm. You are like, oh, it's not, maybe nothing's going to happen, but something's going to happen. And then it just kind of breaks fully. And I feel like he is just such an incredible writer to fully draw you in that way.
I love the imagery of the two decks being islands with water in the middle of them. And it just, it makes you think they're in big trouble here. This isn't good.
Absolutely.
Also, just a bit later on the next page, and one man was lost overboard. That's horrifying.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of said in one sentence, but I think it's also still felt pretty well.
This is bad. This is really bad. It goes on for, 13 days, right?
Well, some would say 12.
That's right. Eustace says 12.
I'm very
No,
curious.
everyone else says 12.
You're right.
Eustace says 13.
Who's right?
Definitely not Eustace. I don't.
But it's such a weird thing to nitpick about.
Well, I think that's
I
his
think
character.
it's yeah.
I agree.
Sorry, we just shut down Phil.
Sorry.
I'm going to go read my book.
Yeah, we'll just have Sarah Jane on for now. That's
Yeah,
okay.
I think the point of that is not whether or not it was 12 or 13 days, but it's just to prove that Eustace is
He's contrarian.
living his
and
own
wrong.
life. Yeah.
And this is a great transition because the next part is we get Eustace's diary for a couple of pages. And the one thing that Eustace complains about so much is how everyone else is so stuck up and thinks that they are better than everyone else.
He's
and
projecting.
It's exactly, that's 100% who he is.
Mm-hmm.
He is the kind of person that's upset because he thinks that, well, I really counted those days correctly, and the people on this boat, they can't even count. And he doesn't see any of the own irony in his feelings.
And not only that, but he was sitting below deck for those days, right? Like everyone else is working really, really hard, and he's kind of just hanging out because he's sick or something.
Exactly.
I also love the way Lucy interacts with him. She just goes above and beyond to make him more comfortable. Like he insists that he got less food and she shares some of hers. She shares some of her water. She goes, girls don't get as thirsty as boys. It also seems like Eustace has an idea of what they should do instead and they're not listening to him. He wants to return to the Lone Islands.
Yeah, let's dive into this a little bit because we get about a week's worth of journal entries from Eustace here. From September 3rd all the way, I think, through September 11th is what we get from him. And a couple of things that just stick out to me. He consistently complains about them not, we've heard him already say he wants the British consul. He keeps saying there's no wireless or even a rocket.
I didn't even know they had Wi-Fi back then.
You're hilarious. And Sarah Jane's just shaking her head.
And smiling. We got the smiling part.
But I was a little just taken aback that Eustace and all of his seemingly endless knowledge hasn't figured out that they're not going to have a radio. Why has he not figured this out? He's been in Narnia for long enough to realize he is in a different place, and yet he's still complaining.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you're just deeply in denial about what's happening. I don't know if you can think back and access
I feel like you were
a
thinking of something
situation
for
like
me.
that. I'm not. Yeah, I think he's it's not even just that he hasn't realized that there's not a radio. He deeply desires that there would be a radio and that there's an out for him. And he's just not going to let go of the fact that he's not going to even allow the opportunity that there is no out.
Those are really good points. And after he talks about the wireless and the the rockets, right? He talks about the real trouble is water. And that they had a leak, and so they're on short rations. Only half a pint a day of water, which is not a lot of water at all. He has an idea, Eustace does, that they should go back to the Lone Islands, but they realize, no, we're too far out. We're 18 days out from the Lone Islands. By the time we get back, we'll have long run out of water. And so the rest of the crew decide we're going to move forward. And I love Eustace's voice that just comes off the page as we read his diary. He is so frustrated by this. And he seems to really believe that he has the right answer here. And I actually think this is an interesting part, his idea of, no, maybe we should go back, because that's not an awful idea to think the way the options of what comes next. But he doesn't really seem to voice his opinion much. Instead, he just keeps it all within and just sits grumpily at his diary, right?
I feel like he has a lot of reasons why they shouldn't do something, but he doesn't have a better plan. And when they press him for a better plan to kind of make a point, he says, I'm the one who was kidnapped. I don't have to come up with a plan. That's up to you.
Exactly. I think as that time goes on, it's such a great insight into his mind. Here's what he writes on September 6th. A horrible day. Woke up in the night knowing I was feverish and must have a drink of water. Any doctor would have said so. Heaven knows I'm the last person to try to get any unfair advantage. But I never dreamed that this water rationing would be meant to apply to a sick man. In fact, I would have woken up the others and asked for some, only I thought it would be selfish to wake them. What a perfect way to get an idea of how his mind works.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who's often right, it can be really hard when other people don't listen to you.
And although this is quite funny, Brown in the book that I've been reading really points out there's something interesting happening here, which is that Eustace, he believes himself to be righteous and moral. He is not someone who is necessarily just all out evil. We talked about this last episode with Gumpus. He's very different characters. But here in Dawn Treader, we're not just having bad and evil characters. We have someone like Eustace, who's he's not a bad guy. I mean, he's not really a nice guy. You wouldn't want to, have a cup of tea with him.
Yeah.
But he's not an evil kid. And he also doesn't see himself as being this stuck-up little brat. He seems, I was thinking about...
They never do.
That's true. I was thinking about that first part of Mere Christianity when Lewis is kind of appealing to a universal right and wrong and morality before he even gets into arguments for Christianity, and thinking about the fact that I think Eustace would fit into this kind of category of, he would say there is a clear right and wrong, and he consistently thinks that he is on the right side. All of his justification is just incorrect. He thinks of, the thing that he dislikes so much about Caspian and Edmund is he thinks that they're thoughtless and unkind. So he would value kindness. He values charity, but his idea of what those things are is very poor. But the virtues inside of him are good and right. It's just so confused, and he's so self-obsessed that he doesn't realize how far off he is, that Caspian isn't this way. I think another way you could read this is that he's just being overly dramatic. But I actually like this more nuanced take, which is that he really does think of himself as a kind, generous person who just has horrible definitions for those words.
Mm.
That really makes me think of The Good Place.
Go on. Just don't I'm a couple episodes behind, but
Okay.
yes.
Well, no, I mean, there's no way to explain it without spoiling it. Just keep going.
Well, is it a new episode?
No, it is this season with
okay.
Brent.
Oh, okay.
Or
You
Brett.
can say that. Yeah.
And yeah, so season 4, there's a character named Brent, and he believes that he's actually destined for the best place. Like he's actually in like a lower tier place, because he's so great, but he just has no awareness of other people. And so it's really funny. It's funny, but it's also really hard to watch him interact with others and like know that he's so right and he's so good, but have no awareness of how his actions or reactions impact anyone else.
Exactly. Phil, you really need to be watching The Good Place, man.
I'm working on reading The Lord of the Rings right now, and then I will take further suggestions.
It's great. Well, if you want to just read the medieval adaptation, just read Dante's Inferno and then Purgatory. And then
Is that like the
Paradiso.
novelization of the TV show?
Exactly.
Oh, cool.
It really is. The Good Place is such a good show. I can't believe that this show is on TV right now. It's a show about ethics and philosophy and morality, and it's also hilarious. And it actually goes and asks some tough questions, and I think they come to somewhat interesting answers, not just some kind of Hollywood 7-year-old type answer. It's actually nuanced and thought through, and it's a great show.
What
It's
channel
not
is it on?
giving me what I'm expecting from TV,
Yes.
which I
absolutely.
love.
What channel is it on?
I think it's NBC.
NBC.
But aren't you just going to watch it
First
like
one's free, NBC.
on... Yeah.
Are you watching it on TV or are you streaming it later?
I watch on
Hulu.
Hulu. Yeah, I watch on Hulu.
It's also on Netflix.
Yeah, the first 2 seasons are on Netflix. So back to the Dawn Treader here. Phil, after Eustace finishes up with his diary, we get this paragraph or this sentence, and I want you to respond to it, okay? What awaited them on this island was going to concern Eustace more than anyone else, but it cannot be told in his words because after September 11th, he forgot about keeping his diary for a long time.
Very foreboding.
Tell me more.
I really hope that J.J. Abrams didn't write this. Is that what you want?
No, dude, you know I love Lost.
I love that it's focused on one character, and it's a character that we're all really frustrated with at this point. Like, even if you're not frustrated, you're just very aware that he has a lot of growing up to do.
Okay.
And it's exciting that it's going to concern him, but hopefully that means that it will improve things for him long term.
So you're taking this as being something's going to happen to him here, because it just says he forgot to keep his diary.
Right.
But you think something is
If
happening to him.
it's something big enough to keep him from focusing on writing about himself.
Okay. Yeah,
That sounds pretty significant.
that's great. I just was interested. As I was reading that, I was like, there's a lot of foreshadowing here, and I wonder what it's like for a first-time reader.
Yeah, and keep in mind we don't really know anything that's happened by the end of the chapter. So I
really don't.
haven't read the next
Yeah.
chapter, so I truly don't know.
Do you want to take a guess? Listeners love this, dude.
Is it aliens?
Do a serious guess.
Is it Aslan? Is he going to show up on the island?
Maybe. I don't know. I haven't read it either.
You haven't read it either?
No.
You don't remember from before?
I do that joke with my students all the time when they ask. It's not funny. I do so many like dad jokes in school. What happens next? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't read it. I just picked this book off the shelf for us to study. Middle schoolers, I've learned, don't think my elementary school level jokes are nearly as funny as my old fourth graders used to.
Having worked with high school students, I could tell you that.
Yeah. What happens next is, they have land has been spotted. They anchor out on the island, and then when morning comes, I guess this should be the morning of September the 12th now, they go ashore to this island. Here on the island, they look back once they've gotten off of the boat. They look back over at the Dawn Treader, and Lewis writes that they can't even recognize what this boat has become, and it's really sad.
Yeah, especially after it was held in such high esteem, and it was in its full glory and gleaming and shining and so well described, and now it seems used up and sad.
Yeah, she looked a crippled, discolored hulk, which anyone might have taken for a wreck, and her officers and crew were no better, lean, pale, red-eyed from the lack of sleep, and dressed in rags. I actually really like this, that here we are at chapter 5, not even halfway through, and the Dawn Treader has been wrecked, and they've got to stop and repair her. It just, if you're a first-time reader, it makes you wonder, what happens next?
Yeah.
Usually you think of on some kind of spacefaring voyage, right? Like in a Star Trek movie, or it'd be the end of a season where the Enterprise might get really badly messed up, but not in the middle of, the 5th episode of the season.
Oh my goodness, until Star Trek Beyond.
You're a big Trekkie, right?
I do love Star Trek.
Yeah.
Shout out to my dad. But Star Trek Beyond begins with the Enterprise getting totaled.
And not just because we like to reference other pop culture. I actually think a similar thing happened to me as I watched that movie for the first time. Like, wait, what happens next? Because usually, I think it's in The Search for Spock where they do like spoiler alert for a movie that came out 40 years ago. I think they self-destruct the Enterprise at the end of Search for Spock. And it's the end of the movie. And it's like, what happens next? And it's like, to be continued. And they come back in the next movie. But to have this happen here, you're just like, oh, well, I don't think Lewis is going to go back to this once more. Because as we see, they're repairing the Dawn Treader. So I think it'd be a little silly if, at the end of the book, they're going to destroy the boat or have it get wrecked all over again. So you're like, oh, that's a trope that he's almost getting out of the way, if you will. No, let's get the big vessel all messed up and have to be repaired. And now we'll move on to this new thing. What happens to Eustace as they go aboard this island?
Eustace decides that he deserves a bit of a break. He's been working really hard. And he thinks no one will notice and it won't really matter if he sneaks off into the woods.
And as he does that, he's kind of starts climbing up this cliff, right? And Lewis writes this very humorous sentence. This showed, by the way, that his new life, little as he suspected it, had already done him some good. The old Eustace, Harold and Alberta's Eustace, would have given up the climb after about 10 minutes. I can relate to this, especially with some of my students sometimes.
Absolutely.
Where they'll do something that they shouldn't do, but I'm like, that took a lot of effort. You shouldn't do that, but I'm kind of impressed. Yeah. And the bar for Eustace is so low as a character right now that I'm reading it and I'm like, you shouldn't run away, but I'm kind of impressed that he's going on a little hike right now.
And he had a goal and he stuck to it until he achieved it.
Well, and I also think this I volunteer coach a soccer team, and you'll tell students like the correct way to kick a ball to get it to go where you want it to go, and they'll be like, oh, it hurts or it's too hard to kick it that way. But when they do it correctly, the ball goes exactly where they want it to go. And so it's just this funny thing of like, yeah, he's not even aware that his current efforts and life have improved at all, but it's just because he's not paying attention.
Yeah.
He's too self-absorbed to see that.
One of the great things about Lewis is how much his writings, no matter how old they get, are so relevant to us now. I love that we get to sit around, a podcast and do this where we have something happening here, literally in a magical land on this island, and we are talking here in the year 2019, and we're all making connections to our own real lives. I think that's the beauty of Lewis and his relevance and influence today.
Well done. It's the name of the symposium.
I mean, kids are kids. They are just not going to be different whether they're in a magical land or not.
That's so true. So Eustace gets to the top of this kind of almost this like giant hill. It's almost a mountain, and he doesn't enjoy it. For a little bit he does, but he doesn't enjoy himself for long.
It specifically says he, for the first time in his life, begins to feel lonely.
Exactly.
And this is so key because I think this is what happens right before really good change starts to happen. You start to see the consequences of something you're doing wrong. In a lot of cases, that would be sin.
Mm-hmm.
And you start to see like, oh, this is, it was probably affecting other people at first, and it was affecting you, you just didn't know it, but now he's feeling the real consequences of it. And he's feeling lonely, and I feel like that's why we're going to have some real change happen soon.
I also am reminded of chapter 11 of Wardrobe, where Edmund is at the little merry band of Narnians who Father Christmas has brought gifts to, and he sees the witch turn them into stone, and it said, he felt bad for someone. I can't remember the exact words, but Edmund has empathy for the Narnians and is starting to regret his decision. An interesting thing as I compare those two is Edmund, this is happening much later in the book, chapter 11, when you're already, about 2/3 of the way through the book, is when he's starting to have some kind of change of heart. Here it is in chapter 5 that Eustace is maybe thinking through a little bit of his actions. And I think the reason that this is starting to happen so early is Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is not really Edmund's story. He's a plot device, and some stuff happens as much, and he has development, obviously. But Eustace is very much, I think, the Dawn Treader is his story. That's how I'm feeling right now. And so it would make sense that if anything is going to happen, I can't say anything else because Phil hasn't read yet, but let's just assume that maybe something does happen to him.
Okay.
It would be earlier because we want to spend a little bit more time with that.
And it's going to take more time.
True.
Do you think Edmund is worse at his worst than Eustace is at his worst?
I don't think so. I feel like they are different.
Different
and maybe
kinds of being the worst?
Yeah. No, I think this, again, with my students, like every once in a while, I'm like, okay, this student is really challenging for perhaps like the emotional toll of coaxing him or her through whatever the challenge is. And then you could say, okay, but this student is really challenging because the student has no spatial awareness and is like about to fall off a mountain. So those are really different challenges. But equally dangerous to the team, right?
And you mean a literal mountain. You're not using that figuratively.
Yeah, I mean a backpacking trip.
Exactly,
Kids on a mountain.
Because you do a lot of stuff outdoors.
That is true. But part of what I think is really beautiful about this is you have Edmund, who in a previous story has gone through this huge change, this huge personal kind of growth moment throughout the whole story, and he's back. And so even though maybe we haven't seen it yet or we haven't experienced kind of a conversation between him and Eustace, Edmund has paved a path in Narnia of what it means to grow up and to mature and to change. And I think it's really beautiful that he's there to kind of lead Eustace in that.
That's so good. When someone has kind of gotten out of that bad spot, that they're able to help other people get there. That's really cool.
I think Edmund and Eustace both deceived themselves in very different ways. Edmund seems to, as he's walking to the witch's house in chapter 9, he continues to tell himself how what he's really doing, the witch really isn't that bad. And he's just lying to himself, and he knows what's happening is not. He knows that he's betraying his family, and he does lie to himself, and he deceives himself. But he has a good idea of what is right and wrong. He's just choosing to do what is wrong. When he lies to his siblings and said, "No, I was just playing with Lucy. We never went to Narnia," he seems to have a pretty good idea that that's the wrong thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Eustace seems to deceive himself in his like I said earlier, in the way that he defines good and evil or right and wrong. And he consistently believes he is always right. I don't think Edmund did in Wardrobe. I think he's trying to pretend like he does, but I think deep down he knows what he's doing is wrong. I don't think that Eustace realizes why he is so idiotic and annoying.
Yeah.
Where Edmund, if he had taken any time to look within himself, I think would have been able to find that, which is why I don't want to, we can't get too much into this because Eustace's story is going to continue. Edmund, really of his own volition, goes back to the good side, if you will. I mean, he's rescued by Aslan not by Aslan, but by Narnians that Aslan sends. But before they've come, he's already decided, I've made a mistake. The Eustace's story, I can't go much further, is going to require more than just Eustace. And I think that's because Edmund didn't know. And so the question to me is, which one is worse? Is Edmund knowing what's wrong and choosing to do it worse, or is Eustace being so ignorant of it and just continuing on in his sin, if you will, and not even caring if, do you know what I mean? It's a really interesting thing.
Yeah, I think whether it's just in the way that it's presented or something that I just deeply feel a kinship with Eustace, I do feel like Eustace is more complex. Like that kind of like, I don't even know maybe what the right choice is, and so I'm just doing whatever I want to do, versus I know what choice I'm making. That the Edmund piece of I know what choice I'm making feels actually easier to intervene. Like I'm again thinking about it from a like working with youth standpoint of being able to go to a student and be like, hey, I think that what you just did was really hurtful, and how did that impact your team, and what can we do about that, versus like, how do you convince someone that they're doing something that's incorrect or wrong or hurtful to the team when they can't see it? And like, what kind of level of effort does that take? I think it's just completely different.
It might not even be worth trying to decide which one's worse, because they're both just pretty bad in different ways.
True.
This is a really good conversation. I love the character of Eustace. He's so much fun to talk about.
Yeah.
I think he's my favorite character we've had so far. I don't speak in absolutes, but I think he
You
might
never
be
do that.
No, I don't. I think he might be one of my favorite characters because he's so much more fun to talk about than all these other characters.
He's got a lot going on.
He has so much going on, and it's not just this. I mean, no one is on Eustace's side. Like, I've talked about this ad nauseum on the show. I've read Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe with a ton of fourth graders, and when I would read this, no one is really taking Edmund's side. I think maybe twice I read Dawn Treader out loud after, I kind of sometimes skipped over Prince Caspian. I know this is going to upset all the publication order
Well,
people.
it upsets you now.
Yes. But I was like, not all the kids are going to like it as much. And I really love Dawn Treader. And I only have time for one more Narnia book. And so I just would read it out loud. And with Eustace, they just love him because he's hilarious. But also, there wasn't this kind of universal, oh, he's so bad. It's more like, oh, he is annoying. But for some reason, I think students, or at least children, young readers, are able to empathize more with Eustace than they are with Edmund, because they probably have been annoying and thought that they're better than everyone else. They probably haven't sold out their family for candy, right? So,
yeah. I mean, I will say that I've read the Narnia series twice now.
okay.
Only ever as an adult. And Eustace is the character that just sticks with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that's a commentary on him or a commentary on me, but it's probably both.
That's fine. So as Eustace is hanging out on the top of this mountain here, he comes to a very frightening realization, which is that, oh my goodness, Caspian and the rest of the crew are going to leave me behind. Did you have a part you wanted to read here, Sarah Jane?
Yeah. So Lewis writes, for every moment, the terrible idea of being left behind grew stronger. If he had understood Caspian and the Pevensies at all, he would have known, of course, that there was not the least chance of their doing any such thing. But he had persuaded himself that they were all fiends in human form. And I loved reading that, because I think that's what happens when you're super self-absorbed, or you think that you've got the right answer. You forget to even get to know the people around you. And of course, if he had thought about it for even a minute and thought about the ways that Lucy just sacrificed for him or gave him food or water, and the ways that people keep checking in with him, he would know that he wouldn't get left behind, that they take care of him, but he can't even grasp. He doesn't seem to have access to that.
That's a great point. And Kevin Kinghorn, who is another C.S. Lewis scholar and writer, he actually wrote an essay that relates directly to what you just talked about, Sarah Jane. It's an essay in a book called The Chronicles of Narnia and Philosophy, and he says this. He says, Eustace believes that he might be left behind because that's what he would do in this situation. And Kinghorn notes, that his response is more about him than it is actually about Caspian. This doesn't reveal much about Caspian at all. It reveals a lot about Eustace. This is probably something Eustace would do.
Yeah.
And Devin Brown makes a similar connection between this and the Two Towers. If you remember in the Two Towers, there's a part where, as I think Gandalf's explaining to Legolas, Aragorn, and Gimli about why Sauron believes that they're taking the ring to Minas Tirith. That was never the Fellowship's plan. That was what Boromir was so frustrated about back in Fellowship. And in the Two Towers, Gandalf's explaining Sauron would do that himself. He would take the ring and use it against himself. He would use it for power. And so he can't imagine that we would send it with two hobbits literally right to his own backyard.
Right.
There's this idea of Eustace not being able to understand any of the goodness or any of the kindness within Caspian or the rest of the crew because it's not within himself. The same way that Sauron can't understand why the free people of Middle-earth would ever do anything except use the ring for power.
Some good connections tonight.
It's good stuff.
Did that get you excited for Lord of the Rings to keep reading?
Yeah. I'm excited
Where
to see
are
what
you right
happens.
now in the book?
Page 137.
Cool. I have no idea what that means.
What's happening?
I feel like you should. They just left Tom's house.
Oh, you have you've never heard about
Frodo
Tom before.
couldn't speak, but he bowed to the lady there.
Broke my whole heart that Tom Bombadil didn't make it into the movie.
I'm so glad he's not in the movie.
Ugh.
I love Tom Bombadil. I love that we don't know who or what he really is, and he would not have made sense in that movie.
Doesn't Nickel Creek have a song In the House of Tom Bombadil?
Yeah, they do.
Yep.
The last thing I wanted to point out, because the chapter is coming to an end, is that Eustace, he comes down this very steep hill here, and he slides down a bunch of loose stones, which are called scree. And again, as I was doing research for this chapter, I went back to Marvin Hinton's book, and Marvin Hinton had a great quote here as he talks about the inclusion of the word scree here. So scree is an 18th century word. It comes from Old Norse, and Hinton writes, well, anything old or Norse attracted Lewis. He found the combination irresistible. And I love this idea. I don't know if it's true or not. The idea that Lewis really just has a word he wants to use. He's like, oh, I'm going to have him go down this little cliff so I can use scree. And I'll even tell my listeners what it is, or my readers what it is in case they don't know. But I just love things that are both old and Norse.
It is super miserable to try and hike down Scree. It's just loose rock and you're just kind of sliding and not making it anywhere. It would be really discouraging if you were Eustace looking at that, trying to think how to get down.
And he's still in, according to Pauline Bain's illustration, he's still in all of his preppy English
Correct, yeah, like his school
clothes.
uniform.
Yeah, exactly. Well, any last thoughts on this chapter before we wrap it up?
I'm just really excited about where we're going. I'm really excited to spend some more time with Eustace.
Pardon the pun, but I really like how this ends with a cliffhanger where he is completely alone and he wasn't expecting for everyone to be gone.
Well, that's exciting because in the very next episode, Eustace is going to awake to a startling discovery.
Ooh.
I was just say nothing from Phil. I thought maybe he would be excited. Nope, not at all.
I'm squealing on the inside.
Okay. Well, before we get to our listener feedback, Sarah Jane, like I said, you're returning champion to the show.
Absolutely.
We have some new questions for you.
Oh,
returning
wow.
listener, yeah.
So exciting.
Last time you were here, you told us your favorite book. It was The Horse and His Boy, and you told us how you got into Narnia.
Yep.
I would like to know...
Through the wardrobe.
I've tried many times.
We would like to know what your least favorite Narnia Chronicle is and who your favorite character throughout all 7 is.
Oh, wow. I feel like I a little bit betrayed myself on the second question earlier. But
That's okay.
So it has been a couple of years. But I remember not really being a big fan of the silver chair.
Oh, interesting.
Well, that's
okay.
different. Yeah.
Because that's a really good one.
Why was that?
Why do you not like that one? I'm just kidding.
I just remember feeling like it was really dark and underground. Is
Correct.
it literally underground?
I don't want to say anything else because Phil's here.
Yeah,
Can
so
you
I
leave
don't.
the room, Phil?
Yeah, I don't really want to answer that question, but
Sure.
yeah, I remember just.
Do you
not-
mean literally dark? You didn't like it, or it was dark as in like atmospherically it was dark? Both would be
I don't
correct. That's why
know.
I'm asking.
Yeah, I think I meant atmospherically.
Okay. That's fair. There's no right or wrong answer.
Eustace stays with me, I think. I feel a lot of kinship to him. I remember you speaking during some of the wardrobe episodes about how much you related to Edmund. And I just feel like Eustace is he's my boy. And yeah, I feel very much like I grew up a know-it-all, and yeah, just thinking that I knew what was best and being really frustrated when other people didn't listen to me. And I think
When they didn't what?
when they didn't listen to me. And I think that his growth and his change is really beautiful, and something that I strive for.
Well, what did it take for you to grow out of that know-it-all phase?
That assumes that I've grown out of it.
Okay. I was like, maybe that's what Eustace will happen to Eustace in the next chapter here.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I think like a couple of tough situations and folks who love me a lot being really honest. And I think maybe that will happen to Eustace too, but who's to say?
That's great. We always love having you on the show. We will obviously we'll continue to have you back.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Before we let you go, though, we have a little bit of listener feedback here.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have 3 emails. They are all about Turkish Delight. We've had these have kind of built up over
Fan
time,
favorite.
and I figured we should go ahead and do all of them at the same time. That would be really fun. The first email is from a listener named Katie, and she just started listening to the podcast, and she wrote this in her email. When you read the chapter Turkish Delight, you seemed to struggle with the fact that Edmund did not hesitate in choosing to eat Turkish Delight. Any child reading this in the 1950s UK would fully understand this. Sweets, candy/chocolate, etc., were rationed in the UK until 1953. In this context, any child would have chosen their favorite sweet to eat without hesitation. This book was published when sweets and sugar had not been freely available for the lifetime of the target audience. In the same way, eating with a stranger is probably not that odd in the context of being evacuated from your home to live with a complete stranger.
Wow.
That's a great insight, isn't it?
That is very good to know. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I remember reading a story they made. I'll have to look this up and maybe get back to you. There was a picture book at one point about American soldiers packing chocolate bars with them when they would go and kind of do like more relational building during World War II. And I don't know if it was in England or in Germany. I'll have to look it up and maybe ask my mom. But I remember that, and that was like a main point of being able to build a relationship because kids were so excited about the chocolate.
Yeah. And actually, I said 3, but we only have 2 because I read the first one at the beginning. That was the email from Richard about folk soul. So the last one here, still about Turkish Delight, it is from Katrina. And she writes, to weigh in on the great Turkish Delight argument, I made some a year or so back while I was in pastry school, and I have to say it was awful. So she went to pastry school, and she has spoken.
That's amazing.
Let me keep reading, though. The kind I had was even fresh, just like another listener recommended eating it, and it was still terrible. So those are my feelings on that. So there's another tally for the disliking Turkish Delight camp.
You should actually go through and tally them.
We really should. Phil, you would also like this because she goes on to agree with you that Caspian is better than Wardrobe. She writes that Caspian is a far more interesting tale, though I can see how the pacing could not be everyone's cup of tea.
Thank you for agreeing with me. I think that they're both really good books, but you have to keep in mind I've read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe probably 4 or 5 times and had it read to me several times. And it's just, when you hear a story that much, it kind of changes how you feel about it sometimes, but also when you read something else with similar characters, in this case the same characters, it really does stand out, and I like how different it was.
All right, y'all. Well, that about wraps up our show for this chapter. Any final thoughts before we go? Before we let you go, Sarah?
Keep on keeping on.
We love your encouragement.
I love so much what you guys are doing, and it's so much fun to be a part of it. So thanks so much for having me.
We're glad you could join us.
Yeah, we really enjoy having you, and you're going to be with us on the Dancing Lawn in December. We have a special Christmas episode coming up, and so we're excited to have you back again.
Thanks.
We good.
All right, would you like to do the honors of wrapping up?
What a delight. Thank you so much. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Aaliyah Steen and Stephen Page for supporting us at the Care Paravel level. Follow us into Narnia at our Twitter or Facebook pages. Do you have any feedback? Email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 406-646-6733. We would appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. This helps other listeners find the show and join our read-through. Also, make sure you have subscribed to the show in your favorite podcast app so you can wake up to a new episode every other Wednesday. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 6.